Welcome to this evening's webinar on securing your dream job in motorsport, which is part of the Girls on Track UK initiative managed by Motorsport UK. I'm Matt Johnson. I'm the head of people at Motorsport UK, and I am very fortunate to be joined this evening by Emma Yates, who is the HR business partner at Alpine Racing.
Evening, everyone.
Before we start, there is a little bit of housekeeping, so I'll just run through that now quickly for you. I just wanted to make you all aware that the webinar is being recorded and it will be made available after the event on the Girls on Track UK community Facebook page, as well as the Motorsport UK YouTube channel. Similarly, if you fancy recapping on any of our previous webinars that we've done, again, you are able to find all of those on that Motorsport UK YouTube channel. Aside from Emma and I, all the webinar attendees will be muted and unable to speak. However, please do feel free to pop any questions you have in the Q&A section, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. A massive thank you for all of the questions that we've already received. There were a lot, which Emma and I are going to do our very best to cover during the course of this call. And we will also do our best to pick up on any other questions that come up throughout the conversation this evening. So to kickstart, I think what I will do is hand over to Emma so that she is able to introduce herself properly.
Thanks very much, Matt. So lovely to speak with you all this evening. Thanks for giving your the time up to come and listen to us, and hopefully it'll be of some use. So as Matt says, I've been HR business partner with the BWT Alpine F1 team. I joined back in March 2021. My focus in my current role is on recruiting and developing young engineers. That's actually people all across the team, interns, graduates, juniors, in every area as well. I work very closely with a lot of universities. I do a lot of outreach initiatives, and it's just very, very exciting to be able to help those who are wanting to get into motorsport. My background actually isn't within motorsport. It's quite unusual, but it's interesting. So my background's actually in the electronic games industry. I never considered that there would be HR roles in motorsport, but I've always been a fan. I used to watch Formula One with my dad growing up, and that's kind of how I got in there. And I saw the advert for my role come up at Alpine, and something just suddenly clicked. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. Why did I not think of that before? And it sort of felt as if I'd written my dream job description, that's what it would have been. I knew it was going to be hard to get into the industry. I knew it was going to be very competitive. And for me, the hardest part of that really was writing an application where I knew I'd stand out. Later on, Matt and I will sort of talk about tips for writing that application, but that was a real struggle for me, knowing that I'd be up against a lot of very, very strong candidates. We had some questions about what our grades were like at school and things. So I thought I'd sort of give a bit of a context around there and how that might have helped me. I was very lucky at school. I did do quite well. However, I feel that my grades and my university degree, which was in psychology, probably helped me to know who I was as a person and give me more confidence in myself. And they did help me secure my initial job, which was actually in learning and development. But it was the experiences that I had in the roles going forward that led me to doing what I am now. And a lot of transferable skills there. But I can't honestly say that those grades directly related to getting me into this position. And I think that it's using what you do have and working with that and selling yourself in that way that really is the focus. Thinking about my contacts in motorsport, so I tried quite hard to broaden my knowledge and look into areas that I don't feel particularly skilled in. I think that makes people more employable. I like to think that that makes me more useful within the team as well. So I have a mentor, and that's really helpful. And I also find that groups such as Girls on Track in particular, and I know we're working with them tonight, but it is true that Girls on Track have been massively helpful in helping me get a lot more experience and work with areas that I'm interested in. So that's about me. I'll pass you back to Matt, who can give you a bit more detail about what he's doing.
Thank you, Emma. So I guess, as I mentioned at the start of this chat, my name is Matt. I'm the head of people at Motorsport UK. I've been in this position since November last year, and prior to that, I worked in professional team sport in rugby union. Knowledge of motorsport was relatively low, although I did grow up in an area where a lot of my friends immediately went to kind of work in the industry. I think that the thing that probably stood out to me was that this was an industry which was going to be a challenge for me. It was going to be something new to me, something to step into, which I wasn't comfortable with, and was really going to test my skill set. So that's actually kind of what drew me to motorsport in that sense, was to get outside of my comfort zone a little bit, which was really, really good. And to touch on the point that Emma was talking about in terms of useful contacts within the industry, I obviously found mine almost once I was already in, as opposed to beforehand. A member of staff I work with quite closely here at Motorsport UK, someone very knowledgeable in the industry in general and in the sport, and someone that I could really lean on to kind of gain that contextual knowledge and really understand a bit more about how the sport works. And we'll talk a little bit more about networking later on as part of this webinar, but I think the important message from me in that point is kind of learning from others, learning from those who have kind of been there and done it and have got the experience within the industry, getting those contacts and really digging into their experiences and working out the routes that they've taken and what's worked and what hasn't. I think is a really good way to kind of set yourself up to understand what it takes to work in motorsport in general. Talking just very briefly about my role, I guess I'd say I'm a HR generalist in that sense, so I cover everything in terms of HR, but recruitment and selection is a really big part of it. And for me, actually, it's one of the most important parts of what we do. Bringing the right people into our organization is I think probably the first biggest hurdle in terms of creating a high performing environment. So I do place an awful lot of emphasis on it, which I'm quite excited to be on this call. So obviously you guys want to hear a little bit more around what might be important in terms of moving into the industry or growing a career in motorsports. So I think we'll kind of dive straight into it, and Emma and I will talk through some of the questions that have already been posed to us, as well as trying to touch on some of the ones in the Q&A, which I can see coming through. And so the first one, Emma, I'm going to kind of throw to you for your thoughts, was all around kind of experience and qualifications and what people might need to actually get into the industry. So from your perspective, what would you say is most important for someone trying to get into the industry? Would it be qualifications, practical skills and experience, who you know, so the network side of stuff, or having actually participated in the sport in some sense in the first place?
Cheers, Matt. So I think it's a little bit of a nitty-gritty question to answer. Somewhat depends on the role and the level of role you're going for. One thing to really consider when you're thinking about this is what you want in your career, perhaps in the medium term as well, and how you can not only get into the industry, but when you're in the industry, do the best you can to continue your career there. And that's why I came to the conclusion that I did when thinking about this question. So qualifications are important when we're looking at applications. They show that someone's capable with certain concepts or technologies, but that can be shown in other ways as well. That people's grades and qualifications shouldn't just define what they're able to do. There are other ways people can demonstrate that. Who you know, yes, having contacts in the industry can be vastly beneficial in terms of just giving you some tips on how to maybe write your applications and giving you that sort of foot in the door. But it doesn't really help you when you're thinking about, for example, becoming the best engineer you can be. So my personal opinion is that if you want to have a fulfilling and enriching career, then really it's that practical experience that you want to be working on beforehand, but then continuing to work on once you do make it in the industry. You know, even when you're in the job, you want to be growing yourself and just getting experience in every area you can, making yourself indispensable would be my suggestion on what's most important. I'm not sure if you agree or disagree with me there, Matt.
Yeah, no, I think I do. I think that the important thing here is that there's not necessarily a one size fits all approach to kind of breaking your way into the industry, and it will be very much role and organisation specific. So I'd encourage people to really look at examples of the types of roles that they want to go into that are being advertised, and have a look at some of those essential criteria that the organisation's asking for. And we'll talk about applications and CVs later on, but ultimately targeting your approach a little bit on what is it that's being asked for. Now, personally, as someone involved in a lot of recruitment, I'd echo what Emma said around the practical hands-on experience, but that doesn't necessarily always need to come in the form of being motorsport specific. For me, it's all about the skills and exposure to the relevant skills that you would then put in place when you're in post. Now, there might be some technical elements to that. So, for example, obviously engineering is pretty specialist in that sense, but there's also other areas in terms of the way in which you work, the way you conduct yourself, your experience of dealing with different types of stakeholders, different people within an organization. So collaborative skills, those sorts of things, I think, are really useful experiences that you can demonstrate that don't necessarily have to have come from motorsport. So you can kind of sell yourself in that sense a little bit if it's not motorsport specific experience. And the other thing that I'd say that I always find, regardless of the level of role, for me personally, someone has to really demonstrate to me that they're passionate about what they're coming into. And that's almost an attitude thing, as opposed to something you've learned at university or learned in a previous role. It's selling to me as the employer that this is the role that you want, and why you want it. That for me, I think, is a really important point. On the kind of qualifications side of stuff, if we kind of focus on that area for a little bit, Emma, if someone is currently studying at the moment, are there any outside of kind of the academic course that they're on at present, whether it's an undergraduate degree or something similar, are there any extracurricular activities that you would recommend to somebody to kind of bolster their toolkit in terms of their applications and their CVs if they're looking to get into motorsport?
Sure. So I think part of this goes back to your previous comment of there's no one size fits all. And people who are looking to get into extracurricular activities, certainly a very, very good idea. A couple of sides to that. The first is if we're looking at things that are related to the role you're going for, research what's available in your local area, volunteering, marshalling, anything relevant to your area of interest, except that it might not be at the kind of level that you're wanting. Find a starting point and work up. Speak to groups, speak to social clubs, speak to anyone you can about what you can get. But something else that I find really, really important when I'm looking at applications is what makes a person unique. And part of that is their personal hobbies, which might be completely unrelated to the role they're going for, but it shows that they have passion, they have skill, and that they have something else going on as well in their life, and that's really important. It's quite a high pressured environment to work in motorsport, and it's important that people don't give up on what they've enjoyed doing outside of work as well. It's a very, very good outlet, and it also it just adds another dimension to people's application, and you feel like you know more about them as a person. You know, when you're looking at lots of CVs where people only mention things related to motorsport, sometimes you think, oh, I'd really like to know more about that person, about what makes them tick, about what motivates them, outside of things directly related to work experience. Not sure if you've had similar thoughts at all.
Yeah, I think so. I think an important point that you mentioned earlier on was, say, like around volunteering, for example. So experience doesn't have to come through paid work. The things that you can kind of demonstrate that you do in your personal life, or that's non-paid, that have relevant transferable skills, is really important. Emma, you mentioned about high pressure environments. To share a kind of a bit of a strange anecdote that that actually has hopefully put me in quite good stead for my career. One of the first jobs I had was working as a waiter in a restaurant, and it took me the first 3 days. I was convinced I was going to quit, because just the pressure of getting things right for people, getting it to them on time, that sort of thing, was just something that I hadn't experienced before. Now that was in a completely different industry, but exposing myself to that and gaining those experiences is something which I know for a fact has definitely set me up in the future for other kind of high pressure, fast paced environments. So although it's a bit of a forced kind of example there, hopefully it gives a bit of an insight into, you don't have to be doing stuff in motorsport necessarily to be able to come to a motorsport related interview or application stage and be able to demonstrate that actually you have those skills, you've done things which are relevant and are transferable into what it is that you want to do. In terms of those kind of qualifications and skills, then one of the questions that we received was, is there any one kind of qualification or skill that you just wish that you saw more of from applications when you receive them?
So I'm going to duck out of answering that question directly, because I do think it really depends on the roles. You know, I'm hiring for roles across marketing, communications, aerodynamics, design engineering. There's no one specific skill that jumps out. What I would say is that I'd really love candidates to directly reference the skills that are listed on the job description. Sometimes I can read a candidate's CV and think, I'm pretty sure they would be able to do this. They're pretty sure they'd be able to do X, Y, and Z, but it's just not made transparent enough, and you can't go on an assumption. So that would be my one piece of advice there, would be to look at the job description and directly focus on what is listed. If you have skills that are listed that you don't have, if there are skills listed that you don't have, you can address those. That's not always a negative thing to say, you know, I'm not trained in this, but I'm willing to learn, or I'm starting to learn. And that actually shows that someone has paid a lot of attention to what you're looking for, which is kind of what you want. You don't want someone who's just glanced over a job description and thought, oh yeah, I'm just going to fire off the standard application that I've got for that. The only skill that I would say that is hot at the minute is coding. I think people who do have some experience with coding are pretty desired, particularly in the Formula One teams at the moment. But that's across, you know, a few areas, and certainly not all of them, and it's certainly not a must for getting into the industry.
I think there's a really important point that you kind of that you made with regards to the fact that there isn't probably a single answer to that question. And as much as I'd like to portray this image that in HR we're kind of like these like geniuses that have these kind of crazy matrices which are really hard for you to kind of break down and understand what it is we're really looking for. Actually, it's really not. If you look at a job description, we've ultimately left breadcrumbs there for you to follow to guide you in terms of the way that you develop your application in the first place. So as Emma said, if you're if we're looking for a particular level of experience in something, or a particular qualification, or a particular skill, chances are we've noted that within the job advert itself. So by doing the scattergun approach and sending exactly the same CV and cover letter off to multiple different organizations relating to a host of different jobs, I would suggest, and we'll touch on it later, will probably not serve you as well as taking the time to really analyze and pick apart the job description that's being advertised, identifying what are the key skills that they're actually looking for, and then almost listing those in your CV and cover letter to say, basically, you're asking for X, here's an example of where I've done it. You're asking for Y, here's another really good example of where I've done it. So rather than there being one thing that we want to see on a CV, it's actually show us that you've done what we're asking for in the first place. And that should set you up in a pretty good place to be able to progress in that process. Which kind of leads on to an interesting question about the criteria that we might ask for, Emma, in terms of the job adverts and the type of people that we're looking for. Does experience need to be within motorsport or racing teams to be useful to people applying for roles?
Absolutely not. So it's, again, depends on the role you're applying for and the level of the role. If you're looking at applying for a senior design engineer with a specific niche, then yes, you need to have some relevant experience, but does it need to be within motorsports or racing teams to be useful? No. I'd consider what is transferable with what you already have. There are, as Matt mentioned earlier, there is going to be a vast amount of experience you have, which is going to be relevant to what you're doing. And going back to an example on me, my experience is not within motorsport industry, but within HR, there's so much that crosses over, and it's about having a passion and being able to understand what that role is asking. So I look at my role and I think, okay, that job description is asking for someone who can look after a graduate program. Well, that's not something I've done before, but what I have done is set up performance management systems. There's a lot there that can be similar between the two. Again, though, you can always address the fact that you don't have that specific motorsport experience. You can address you have a passion for motorsport, and just thinking about whatever you have that you've done, which you could look at and say, yeah, this is what you want. There's a lot of innovation within motorsport is what makes changes, and it's those changes that pip competition. Think about what makes you you, and think about what you've got to bring to motorsport, and those teams would be my advice on that one.
Yeah, nice. I like it. And I actually think it's a really interesting question for us on the other side of this to kind of think about as well as employers. Motorsport, as with other sports as well, having worked in a different sport myself, can be quite a small community at times in terms of the number of roles available or the amount of people in there that you're likely to meet. And when we're talking about innovation, it's the ability to kind of bring new ideas, fresh ideas to something, and challenge the way that you've previously thought about a problem, perhaps. And so actually, as an employer, I think it's quite an interesting challenge for us to be like, actually, do we always want to hire people from within motorsport into our roles, or do we want to expand outwardly and bring in fresh ideas and fresh experience from other industries to kind of help us grow and develop? So not just a good question in terms of what you guys can take from it, but certainly one to challenge our thinking as well, I think, which is good. Emma, how would, obviously we're talking about experience, and there's no doubt that if you do have if you're able to obtain some sort of experience within the industry that exposes you to the same skill sets that are being asked for on a job description, then obviously that's going to set you up with a kind of a favorable situation, a favorable CV. How would someone approach finding useful work experience to kind of help them break in? What approach would you take to finding that experience in the first place?
Sure, absolutely. So I know from talking to people at a lot of careers fairs that it can be difficult for people to find work experience in the industry. Some of that comes down to the fact that particularly, and I speak for Formula One here, and not all of motorsport, that the teams run quite small work experience programs sometimes. Some teams do. It can be quite difficult with the time pressures to have work experience students. So I do understand it's difficult for people to find it, but I would suggest asking around, contacting whoever you can, joining a group such as Girls on Track UK, using all your connections, LinkedIn, finding whatever organisations you can that have links, and accepting that, again, it might not be the role you're wanting long term. It might not be exactly linked to what you're wanting long term. But you never know what's going to come up. That's one thing I've definitely learned in my working in motorsport. Things change so quickly that you never know what opportunities you're going to have or who you're going to talk to next. And just grabbing every opportunity you can, making the most of it, being bold, being confident. Don't be afraid to speak up and ask. And you're competing against so many other people for these experiences, that those who don't speak up, it can be a lot more difficult to find what you're looking for. Yeah.
And I think that one of the other things that I noticed about that, so we obviously, I'm sure Emma, you're probably the same, we received quite a lot of requests for work experience, and unfortunately, due to the volume, it's really hard to accommodate all of those. But one of the things that always impresses me is when somebody is able to really articulate, and this probably relates back to a point I made earlier on, they're able to really articulate why they're passionate about what it is they're asking to do, and why this is the route for them, rather than it seeming like a kind of a blanket approach. It almost feels like you're sending me kind of a personal message to say, I'm really interested in this position, or getting some experience specifically at Motorsport UK, and this is why, and this is the area I want to go in. I think that when somebody can demonstrate that they've almost done their research beforehand and they've really thought about this beforehand, I think it inevitably kind of stands out that little bit more from my perspective. How much work experience is enough, Emma?
So I'm just going to touch on something you just mentioned. Actually, very, 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 very good example there, because sometimes people, I get lots of emails about experience, and sometimes people will, it is a blanket email, but sometimes people will go the extra mile and they will say, I've been in touch with this person, I've watched this race, I've been following Alpine, I've been doing this, I think I'd be really great and I could bring this to the team. And that's someone who genuinely has an interest in your team and your work, and that really can make all the difference. So making things personal, I think, Matt, that's a really fantastic point now. How much work experience is enough? I think that's very, very difficult to put an answer on. My honest answer would be that no one should ever hit a point where they're not developing themselves career-wise. It's not the answer people want to hear, but I think that, if you continue to grow, motorsport is an area which is always growing and evolving, and people need to be able to grow and evolve with that. In terms of getting work experience before you get into the industry, some people have more access to experience than others, and at the end of the day, you've got to go with what you can get, and putting yourself out there, again, trying as many opportunities as you can, using initiatives like Girls on Track UK, careers fairs, LinkedIn, maybe social groups within the area that you live, just emailing track days, event days, things like that, and trying to get experience in. As long as you're trying, then you're doing everything you can, and I wouldn't put an amount of time on what's enough.
Okay, that makes sense. So one of the things that I know is definitely coming up in the Q&A, and I appreciate people are dropping questions into that at the moment. I'm trying to keep a bit of an eye on those in line with the other questions that we also are looking to answer. But some people have mentioned around network and how important is network, and what role that kind of plays in terms of the industry. So what would be kind of your best advice in terms of knowing people in the industry and kind of do those connections ultimately underpin starting a career in motorsport?
In a similar, going back to one of my previous answers, really, do those connections underpin starting a career in motorsport? They certainly can, and they certainly help. I know that we have a lot of young people who we've met at careers fairs or university seminars or via college talks or even school talks, who keep in touch with some of our engineers, and they sort of have an informal mentoring partnership that exists. Or they provide guidance, or they'll even just check in every now and then, see what's going on. Now that might not be feasible for everybody to do, but really using the most of every resource channel that you have to get those networking opportunities. And what I'd say is, when you know you're going to be going to network somewhere, bring a list of questions, or have a list of questions in mind that you want. Have your contact details and make sure you get some, their contact details. Keep that link up, keep that connection going. Join in with events where you're actually meeting up in person where possible. Some travel, around the UK might be necessary, but get your name out there, get your face out there, keep talking to people, bring along examples of things you've done, and if you keep pushing, people eventually will be like, yeah, we'll give you a chance, you're keen, seen you before, I recognise your name, yeah, that person, yeah, spoken to them, they're certainly enthusiastic. That's kind of the more you get your name out there, the more you get your face in, that will help you with that journey.
Yeah, and I think I guess coming back to one of the points I made kind of during my intro is for me, networking has been really, really useful in terms of upskilling myself on what has and hasn't been successful for people in terms of their own personal journeys and their own careers. Not everybody's route is going to be the same, but it doesn't have to necessarily just be your experience to be a learning opportunity for you. So the more people who are kind of already embedded within the industry that you can make a connection with, even if only for like 15 minutes to sit down and have a coffee, for example, and pick their brains a little bit, those kind of nuggets of information can help to guide the direction that you try to take in terms of either within the industry or trying to secure your way into the industry in the first place. And I'd be kind of creative about it as well. Like Emma mentioned there about getting out and meeting people. There's careers fairs, there's the use of LinkedIn. The basic version of LinkedIn is fine for networking. There's it's free to use. There's group functions on there. You can connect with people directly. There are various ways that you can kind of go about it. You can make contact with organizations directly. If you know the name of the person that you're trying to connect with, especially if you're contacting an organization. So for example, if I was contacting Alpine, I would try to work out who I need to speak to. So I would find, okay, I need to speak to Emma Yates. So when I drop a message to Alpine, I'm addressing it to Emma specifically. I always think that automatically gives you that little bit more of a hook than just a, although polite, dear sir or madam. It's far less personal. And I think if you can find someone's name specifically in the area you want to go into, again, it shows that initiative that you've gone a little bit further, you've done that little bit more research, because this is something you're passionate about and that you really want to get into. So those are probably kind of my main points on that. I'm conscious of kind of where we are time-wise. I know there's a couple of key points that we definitely want to make sure that we cover before the end. There's there's quite a niche area that I'm going to skip to quickly now, Emma, if that's okay, around overseas candidates. And I know that we've been having some questions come into the Q&A section about overseas candidates as well. What advice would you give to an overseas candidate who requires visa sponsorship?
So really, for me, it's all about finding the best person for the role. We do sponsor candidates if they are the best person for that job. That's what's important. So there's no reason why someone who required a visa couldn't work in Alpine team, for example. I can't speak for all teams, but for us, for certain, that's the case. My advice would be for them to contact the place they're wanting to apply prior to applying and see if that's something that's a possibility. It might not be. So before you put all that effort into writing your brilliant CV and cover letter, as we're going to go into in shortly, definitely get in touch, see what their policy is on that, see what the chances are. You can ask about the possibility of doing things like, okay, what is their remote working policy? What are their visa specifications? What opportunities would you need? Is it a permanent role? Things like this. Are there opportunities for you if you don't fulfill the criteria that they're looking for that role, for example? Just do your research first would be my major piece of advice for them.
Yeah, I'd echo those points as well. And I think firstly, just for clarification for everybody involved in the process, just making contact if you think that you require visa sponsorship, just making contact with the organisation to firstly ascertain can they do that? Is that something that they have the ability to support? And not all organisations do. So I think if you clarify that at the start, that automatically then could potentially save you quite a bit of time. But the reality is, if it's a role where, or an organisation that's able to sponsor visas, they're going to want the best person for the job, regardless of kind of where they're from in that sense. So it comes back to what we were saying before. It's relevant skills, relevant experiences, and being able to demonstrate that will be key. Nice segue from you, Emma, because you mentioned CVs just now, and I know that that's a big point that we want to make sure that we cover this evening. So in terms of kind of like initial applications, what are your top tips for creating that kind of killer CV and cover letter combo?
So I have quite a few top tips, but yes, it's a very, very good question, and one that we get asked quite a bit. And it is important because we have many candidates for each position. So my very, very top tips would be focusing on the small details at first. For example, giving your CV a relevant name. Don't call it standard CV. If you're applying to Motorsport UK, but Motorsport UK CV, Alpine CV, make sure that your email address is up to date on it. You don't want to be emailing the person saying, oh, actually, it's wrong. This is the correct address used. Postal address up to date, name on there. Update your CV based on the role you're applying for. So, if you've got, as Matt mentioned, being a waiter might not necessarily be relevant if you're 20 years into your career and you did that as a job when you're out of school. What you want the person to look at when they're first looking at the CV is you want their eyes to hit the most relevant experience you have straight away. Make that front and centre and expand on why that is, why you put that on there. However, going back to Matt's point about the waiter, was transferable skills, you can put it in, but you don't want that necessarily to be the first thing someone sees if you've got something else that is perhaps more relevant. Use visuals if that's suitable to make it stand out. Just seeing a block of text can be quite hard for people to read through if we're going through a lot of CVs. You can use an online CV formatter. There are quite a lot of clever little tools that just make it look a bit different to the standard ones. My suggestion would be not bullet pointing or listing A-levels and GCSEs in a long drop-down list. You can keep that more concise, and again, really sort of only putting in there what is specific to to that role. Make it personal, get your personality and interests across. We want to know who you are at the end of the day as well, the kind of person that we might be working with. Think about your formatting. And my sort of personal favourite is using clear examples. So when you're looking at jobs you've done, you can say, you know, I've improved XYZ by 20% within 2 years. That's quite a good way of clearly stating that you've done something well, and that's what you would bring to the company you're applying for. Those would be my CV top tips, but I'm sure Matt's got some more to add as well.
I think one of the challenges for me, I've realised, as part of the way we're doing this, Emma, is that I always go second, and so then I've got to think of something that you haven't already said, which is a bit of a challenge. So I think some of the, if I was to really narrow it down to a few things that really stand out to me, one, there is a bit of that formatting element that Emma said before. If I open up a document and as the individual reading it, it's hard to connect with, it's hard to read, automatically that kind of, it almost puts you on the back foot a little bit. And so one of the things I'd recommend you doing when you go to send an application in is to almost pause for a second and try to think about the audience that you're trying to connect with. So when they receive this, what are they going to think? How are they going to react to it in terms of a visual piece of information that's in front of them, which is what Emma was saying about breaking up blocks of text, for example, or looking at the way that it's formatted. Sometimes less is more. So CVs that are 6, 7, 8 pages long are not necessarily more effective than those kind of punchy 1-2 pages that really show me these are the key things that I bring to the table. And the same with a cover letter. One side of A4 should be plenty to be able to really demonstrate that. Again, I keep saying it, I'm a broken record, but that passion for what it is that you want to get into, why you are the right person for this role. And from my perspective, why do you want to work for Motorsport UK specifically? Or from Emma's, why do you want to work for Alpine and not one of the other Formula One teams that we obviously won't mention because they're not on this call? That's the key thing, I think, for me there, is understanding what does your audience want to see. And a nice easy way to achieve that could be to just pause before you press send and ask a friend to read through it, ask a parent or a family member or someone, take a look at this for me. What are your initial reactions? What do you initially think when you look at it? And that feedback can be really useful to get someone else's perspective. We all get a little bit snowblind at times when we spend so long working on the same document for a period of time. We get to the end and we think, yeah, that's great. Actually, take a step back and get someone else to look at it before you send it could be a really useful bit of feedback for you before it goes off to the organisation. Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing for me, other than the breadcrumbs piece, actually, which I mentioned earlier on. So tailor it, make sure that it fits the job advert that's been left. Look at the clues that the organisation have placed within the job advert, and make sure that your CV and cover letter reflect the things that they are specifically asking for, and that will stand you in really good stead when it comes to them doing their selection process. Once you get past that that kind of selection process, and let's say that we went forward for kind of an interview, Emma, what does a successful interview look like? How do you ace an interview at Alpine?
$1 million question. I'm just quickly going to go back to actually your CV, because as your CV question, as you were talking, there was something else that came to mind specifically for cover letters. It was just check your spelling and grammar, and that for me is an absolute must. And you always get the horror stories of people that don't change their cover letters and write the wrong company name.
Literally just going to say the same thing, yeah.
Or use the template cover letters from the internet that we've all seen 100 times before, but change a few words around. That for me is an immediate an immediate put off, really. And I know quite a few managers who would just immediately reject a cover letter that has those errors on. So do check those. But yeah, once you've successfully gone past those hurdles and you reach your interview, so now I think general common sense things like turning up on time, doing research into the location and where you're going to park, or how you're going to travel there, just so that on the day that's not a panic. Wearing appropriate clothing to the interview. You can always ask the person you've been in touch with about what would be appropriate to wear. It sounds obvious, but sometimes wearing a formal suit, might not be the way to go. If in doubt, dress smarter than casual. But if you're not sure, do check. Check who you're going to be asking for at reception. You want to be arriving calm. You want to know. You want to have done your prep, because that will put you in really good stead. Treat it as an interview in reverse as well. You're going to be investing a lot of your time, which is precious, with this place. You want to have some really good questions in your bank that are genuine questions. The reason why we give people the opportunity to ask questions is because we know it's important for people to enjoy where they're working. So, not using your standard questions are fine, but use that questions as an opportunity to really show that you are passionate about this role. You've done research about the role, and you know what that role might entail, and you are really trying to find that two-way feedback about it as well. Obviously, have your job description emblazoned in your mind, and with all your questions, be thinking back on what you saw and what they wanted. If the job role you're going for might lend itself to a portfolio, but they haven't asked one, bring one. There's absolutely there's nothing bad about bringing something extra to an interview and showing that this is what I've brought. Can I show you? That's something that certainly has impressed me in the past, when we've had candidates through.
Yeah, I think again there's clues that you can tap into in preparation for the interview. One of the things that Emma mentioned there is kind of who's going to be on the panel, who's going to actually be there. Now, some organisations will actually state that in the invitation to the interview in the first place. That's something that we do. Not everywhere will, so there's nothing wrong with going back and just asking actually who will be involved in the process. Would they mind kind of sharing that? And I know what I would do in that situation. I'd be straight on LinkedIn learning about kind of what's their background, how long have they been working at the organisation that I want to get to, and are there any questions I want to kind of ask them specifically. I think again, if you're sat there and suddenly someone comes out with a question and says, "So Matt, before you were at Motorsport UK and you worked for Leicester Tigers, what was the difference between the two?" I'd be like, "Oh, okay, fair enough. You've done your research." And again, it comes back to that: how hungry is someone for this position and this opportunity? The other thing I'd say is it's really hard to do, but almost kind of relax into it a little bit and try to enjoy it. Try to treat it as an experience. I'm not necessarily one to just say kind of like, oh, everything's about kind of fate, and if it happens, it happens. But ultimately, there's only so much you can control. So go there, enjoy the experience, enjoy learning from it. And if you get that role, great. If you don't, then it's an experience which is going to help to shape your next one as well. So try to enjoy it as much as you possibly can. Yeah, I think those are the only things that I'd really use to build on what Emma's already said there.
I was just thinking about, how about people that are attending interviews virtually? Do you have any sort of thoughts on how tips like getting a tech set up?
Yeah, so that's quite interesting actually, because as part of our process here at Motorsport UK, we generally tend to have a two-stage kind of interview process. The first one will generally be via Teams, where we'll meet more candidates at the first stage before we kind of whittle that down to a final few who we will invite into Bicester for a face-to-face and something a little bit more in depth. And I think there are certain tricks that you can kind of put in place to make sure that your virtual setup is appropriate. the obvious ones is making sure in advance that you're comfortable with making sure that your camera works, making sure that your microphone's working correctly, checking your background. And so we usually use Teams rather than Zoom at Motorsport UK, and we have a preset kind of organizational background, a really nice one, motorsport flags and everything. And we don't usually use Zoom. So for the purpose of this, one of the first things I was very conscious of is that I'm sat in a room in my house at the moment, and I've got various kind of pictures on the wall and stuff like that. And from a professional perspective, it probably doesn't come across as well for me to be showing you that at the moment. So actually just putting the blurred background on is a way to kind of just help to keep that professional vibe a little bit more in there as well. So those would be some of the key homework tasks to do before you get onto there. And I think it's probably becoming more normal based on the last few years to talk to someone from behind a screen, but just try to be yourself as much as you can. When you'd be talking to somebody normally, I do it all the time, my hands are constantly going, but you'd be moving around a little bit. Try to remember, try to keep your body kind of relaxed a little bit, even when you're on screen, if it's a little bit alien, and use that body language to talk to someone, even through Teams or Zoom, I think is still important. Anything that you'd add to that, Emma?
Not really, no. I think that pretty much sums up what I would have said. The only thing would be to think about, I think there can be a tendency sometimes for people to act more informally when the interview is virtual, and that extends to what people might wear, or as you mentioned, sort of move around, so people swing on their chair and stuff while they're being interviewed, or I've seen people check their phones or clearly checking another screen. And that's just something, basically, if you wouldn't do it if you were sat in front of the person, don't do it virtually. Yep. Would be my only other thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And it's a challenging one for people, I guess, especially when they're kind of sat in their homes in an informal environment, but a formal kind of scenario. Finding the balance between the two is quite key. So it's a really good point. I'm very conscious of where we are in terms of time. I know that there are a lot of questions in the Q&A side of stuff. I think we've touched on a fair few of them, but we will review them after the call as well, just to make sure. Before I kind of wrap up, I guess I've just got one final question for Emma, and hopefully I can chip in with something meaningful as well. But are there, Emma, any final kind of tips or key messages that you would put across to someone who is looking to find their way into the motorsport industry now?
I think my final top tip would be keep trying, but at every opportunity ask for feedback on why you might have not been successful. Feedback is hard to hear. No one likes being told, no one likes thinking that they might be criticised or being told that something was wrong. However, it is something that you can use to improve, and you'll probably find a lot of the feedback you get is going to be quite constructive, and I'd hope it would be constructive and useful. And so working from that, I think, can be vastly beneficial.
Yeah.
Apologies for everyone that can hear Hoover in the background, by the way. The perks being in the office after hours.
Nice. I can't hear anything. I think persistence is the other thing which I'll probably add to that as well. Sport in general is a difficult industry at times to get into, by the very nature of there are so many people that want to be a part of it and want to be involved in some capacity. So competition is generally high, and that means that at times it will be difficult to find that kind of perfect opportunity that you want. And to come back to what we were saying earlier on, it might be that you initially start to broaden the scope of the type of roles that you're willing to move into to gain that relevant experience before you start to narrow down on the kind of the end goal, essentially. But either way, for me, persistence is key. If it's something that you really care about, something that you really, really want, then keep plugging away at it. Use the information that Emma's mentioned there about around the importance of feedback, and just keep kind of pushing for that that role that will ultimately kind of make your start in the industry. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of the session for this evening. A huge thank you to all of you for joining us. Obviously, we hope that the session has been in some way useful. Appreciate that there's been a lot of questions that we've tried to cover and a lot in the chat. And if there's anything that we've missed, then if there's an opportunity for us at some point to cover that, then we'll do our best to do so. Thank you to the Girls on Track UK and Motorsport UK for making the event possible, as well as giving both Emma and I some airtime as well, which is always nice as HR. And on that note, I guess, a massive thank you to Emma for giving up her own time as well to join us and share her brilliant insights. So thank you very much, Emma. Really appreciate it. For anyone who isn't a Girls on Track UK community member, it is free to join. We currently have more than 6,000 members, and we would also love to welcome you to that group as well. A link for joining should appear in the chat function imminently. I think it actually already has, and there's a lot of people saying thank you on there at the moment, so appreciate that. The link is in there somewhere, so dig around, you'll find it. There's also a link to be able to join our mailing list as well if you'd like to. Once the webinar itself closes, you'll receive a link to a quick survey. We would love feedback. It helps us to be kind of better and kind of grow this for future events as well. So if you're able to spare a moment to complete that, that'd be much appreciated. And also keep an eye on your mailboxes for any news on upcoming events or exciting competitions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt, for supporting me as well. It was a lot of fun, and thanks everyone for listening to us for the last hour. Glad it's been helpful, and it's really nice seeing the messages come through. I'm sure we can get the link out to everybody as well. It is getting sent in the chat, so yeah, should be good.
Thanks all.
Right, bye.